Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Preservation School, the renovation of the Renwick Lighthouse. Our upcoming programming includes an afternoon Preservation School class on block printed wallpaper on April 29th, and that night, our Six to Celebrate party. On May 3rd, we have a Six to Celebrate tour of Little Syria. Information about all of our upcoming programming can be found on our website, hdc.org. If you have any questions about programming, you can contact me at marbulu@hdc.org. Tonight's class will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel for free viewing. You may also watch all of our previous Preservation School classes, virtual tours, and conference panels on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, City Council, and the New York State Council on the Arts for supporting Preservation School. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat and they will be addressed at the end. Now I'll hand it over to Tom to lead tonight's class. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I assume you could hear me. This is my first time doing a Zoom presentation, so I apologize for any glitches. I've already had a couple here working with Michelle, but she's going to be presenting the slides and I'm going to be talking from two different places here. So tonight we're going to talk about a project that we were lucky to be involved with on Roosevelt Island, the Renwick Lighthouse. And you can go to the next slide here. It's Michelle, can you go to the next slide?
You not see the next slide?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Nothing?
No.
It's just working. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing the screen share at all?
Well, I see just your whole desktop with the first slide.
Well, let me stop.
Oh.
Do you see it now?
Yep, there we go. So there we go.
Is that correct?
There we go.
Okay.
So James Renwick, Jr., an architect, quite prolific in New York City. Most of you likely know of his work. I mean, he did St. Patrick's Cathedral, as well as Grace Church, the smallpox hospital. And he came from a very prominent family in New York and kind of started out very early. I mean, he entered Columbia at, I think it was 12 or 13 years old and graduated when he was 18. And then he won a commission to do Grace Church when he was only 25 years old, which is pretty amazing. I was lucky enough to work on Grace Church for a number of years back when I was working with Walter Melvin, and that was the first time where I was really exposed to James Renwick's work, and it was really astonishing to see the detail and complexity that he put together when he was only 25 years old. And then further looking at St. Patrick's, what he did there, and then the Lighthouse was done in 1872 while he was involved doing a lot of public work with working on different public works throughout the city, not only hospitals, but prisons and asylums. And with that, he got involved with doing work on the northern tip of the island there, which is where the lighthouse is located. You can go to the next slide. So he had a couple of different partners over his years, but when he did the lighthouse, it was with Renwick and Sands. Not much is known about his partner, Sands, but at that time, they were the supervising architect for the Department of Public Charities. And that's the group that really got him connected with doing a lot of public work throughout the city. It was in 1872 where the city actually reached out and wanted to have this lighthouse built at the northern tip there. The city had purchased the land in the early 1800s, and I think it was just because of its proximity in the channel there was a lot of accidents, so they were looking to have a lighthouse put there. And in fact, it was listed to have the lighthouse to be a red light there, which is, again, a danger signal. In finding some of the documents that were up at the Avery Library, we found some interesting things, such as that the ironwork was bought for $1,383 back in the day, as well as the painting was not to exceed $150 for the whole project. The stonework is attributed to two inmates that were masons there on the island, and they utilized a lot of the stonework or they quarried the stone from the island itself. And in fact, there was a stone that was inscripted with this James or John McCarthy's passage here, and that stone unfortunately was lost or stolen at some point, and they think possibly in the 70s, but it was gone for quite some time. Next slide, please. And anytime we get involved with a project, I just like to get into the history of the whole timeline of how things progressed with a building. And here, one of the early images is from a Thomas Edison movie that was done in 1903. And this, you can actually find this on YouTube or Library of Congress. And I just have to Google Blackwell Island, Thomas Edison. And it's an interesting little moving image, but it's really what's moving is the boat that the camera is on, and it's moving down the East River. And you can see the lighthouse in the picture. The lighthouse was decommissioned in the 40s, but before that, the whole octagon or the interesting top part of the lantern there was removed. We think around that 25 or so was the first time that was gone. It was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1972 and designated a landmark in New York City in 76. There was some renovations done in the late 70s when they created the Lighthouse Park, but that was really the last time that anything of substance was done on the island or on the lighthouse. Next slide, please. And these are some of the images. There's quite a few you can find online of the lighthouse in the early day, where the Renwick form at the top of the lighthouse. And again, it's at the northern tip of the island. And you can go to the next slide, please. And this is just a detailed view. This is probably the best photograph that we had on the left there of that Renwick form. And then on the right is the first image that we see of after that upper portion was removed. And there was some passage that we found in some newspapers saying that it was in disrepair and they were trying to stabilize it at one point. And then in this photograph in 1933, you can see it was completely taken off and replaced. Next slide, please. And what they replaced it with, as you can see in that former photograph, is just really a stock standard issue lighthouse lantern. And this image on the left is just one of the working drawings of the Coast Guard issue lighthouse tops that were given out to lighthouses up and down the eastern side of the United States. And they came in both 8 and 10 and 6-sided configurations, and why they put a 10-sided top on top of an 8-sided structure, it still is beyond my understanding. I don't know what happened there, but somebody goofed, I think. On the right is the Fresnel lens that was there originally. This is just a depiction of one. The only piece that was left when we arrived was the stanchion at the bottom. Next slide, please. And these are just some other photographs showing how it deteriorated over time. The photo on the left is from the Habs photographs from the Library of Congress when they did an historical building survey. There's a number of photographs taken at that time that you can see how the neglect had taken effect. And the photo on the right is before they constructed that Lighthouse Park. And again, it was kind of overrun with weeds and almost a jungle-like characteristic there on the northern tip of the island. Next slide, please. So we got involved with the project through our introduction through Judy Birdie with the Roosevelt Island Historical Society. She asked us to work on the visitor center there back in 2010, where we did some landscape site work and restored the cast iron and the roof on the structure there. And that's the visitor center is located right at the base of where the tram comes over from Manhattan. And if nobody's been there, I certainly encourage them to go and visit. It's a cute little building. Originally, it was located on the Manhattan side, and it was one of the trolley entrances for the tram where the trolley cars that you would get when you went over the 59th Street Bridge. On the right, through that project, we were introduced to REOC, and got introduced to do the slate roof restoration project at the Chapel of Good Shepherd, and that was done in 2011. And while we were there, REOC asked us to go then take a look at the lighthouse as we were proceeding through that project. Next slide, please. So it was in 2011 when we first did our initial survey. And here you can see, again, it had been pretty much neglected over the last 30 years or so. The cast iron was starting to break apart in areas. Graffiti was seen, open joints in all the masonry on the interior, some shifting of the stones at the base. But the actual masonry of the stanchion itself, the shaft of the lighthouse, was in remarkably good shape. So we put together a whole survey at that point with some budgets, and I think they just filed it away at that point. So next slide. And then it was 7 years later where they asked us to kind of refresh it. And if nobody knows the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation, which runs all of Roosevelt Island, it's actually a state-run organization. Actually, the state owns the island. Actually, they lease it. They have a 99-year lease from New York City for the whole island. And so it's a government agency, and you're dealing with somewhat bureaucracy and politics with this. And so the northern tip of the island was always somewhat neglected. And there's a lot of thought where, all the money was being spent on the southern tip where, the FDR Memorial was, and they were forgetting about the northern tip. So once the memorial on the southern side was finished, the focus kind of shifted to the northern tip, and they decided to actually start focusing on this lighthouse. So here we are back 7 years later, and the conditions have gotten worse. We actually then at this point engaged with Berkshire Dimensions and had a laser scan done of the whole structure. There was some thought that possibly it may have been leaning or shifting, and we determined that it was in sound and quite plumb and in good shape as far as the masonry was concerned. But we also utilized drones to get closer looks at the actual upper lantern, outside of the lantern, and the concrete work, and there it was really quite distressed. Next slide, please. As well as on the inside, the cast iron was starting to break apart where all the connections were. A lot of shifting and further corrosion that was really starting to be detrimental to the whole structure at the top. Next slide, please. And here, at this point, I basically mandated in a sense that protection needed to be made as far as the structure. So we had a sidewalk or a pipe scaffold installed, and we put protection netting all around all the concrete. As you can see here, that concrete platform where the cast iron lantern was based on was completely blowing apart at this point. And that was, it was crudely put together to begin with, and it just, over the years of neglect and the exposure there, really just wreaked havoc on the concrete and the iron rods that were inside embedded into the reinforcement. Next slide, please. So this kind of left us with, all right, REOC at this point, was pretty determined to restore the lighthouse. I mean, the funds seemed to have been there at this point, now that they were again finished with the southern tip of the island, and there was a whole new focus. There was plans for a whole art installation on the northern section right next to where the lighthouse is. So there was a lot of push to do a project. So we started looking at both restoring the existing cast iron lantern and the masonry work. And I was always drawn to the form of the Renwick lighthouse, and it was really quite unique. And I felt that it really needed to do something that would pay homage to that. Having grown up in the 60s, the Gemini space capsule came to mind first thing when I saw this. And it's still, I mean, I think it was quite inspiring to see some of the old photographs. So we kind of did some mock-ups drawing wise in terms of doing it in structural glass because, again, knowing that there was no budget to do it in cast iron, and even if we could, there was no details or original drawings to really fully understand what the intent or the original detailing was to recreate faithfully the true Renwick design. So we took the approach of really doing more of an interpretation of it rather than trying to do an exact copy of it. Next slide, please. So we outlined basically the two options for REOC to review, and with that kind of put together pluses and minuses of each approach. And the main selling point with the structural glass aspect was that it would be more maintenance free in a sense, and where if we restored the cast iron lantern the way it was, not only was it not really faithful to the original design and not historic in a sense to the original design, but it would have required further upkeep, at least on a 5-year basis. That would just be a real drain to the resources on the island. So by doing it in stainless steel and glass, would really cut down on future maintenance costs. And then also at the same time, giving some respect to the original form of the intent that Renwick had for the lighthouse. Next slide, please. So at this point, then they gave us the go-ahead to proceed further. So we needed to convince the preservation community that this was the correct approach to take. And so I was looking for other precedents at the time that we could point to. And one of them that came to mind was the Venturi Scott Brown project in Philadelphia, where they basically recreated the form of Benjamin's house, Benjamin Franklin's house in Philadelphia that did not exist. And there was very little documentation as to exactly what it was. So they created just a skeletal form that created this so-called ghost structure of the building itself. The project on the right is an unbuilt project by Mikado Silvetti down in Virginia, which is a historic plantation building that is in somewhat of a ruined state. And their proposal is to actually envelope it in structural glass to basically preserve it, but also give a sense of the form. This is an ongoing project that they've been trying to raise money on for quite some time, and I think they're actually starting to get ready to potentially get some portions of it completed. Next slide, please. So we had to go to various community and government agencies. We started with the State Historic Preservation Office. We needed to get their input and approval. And in fact, they said because we were state-owned, it was more advisory in a sense, so that they didn't necessarily need to approve it, but they basically said that it was no adverse impact our project. So essentially saying that by removing that top lantern that was not historic to the original structure, it was not adversely impacting the National Register of the lighthouse itself. We also went to the Friends of the Upper East Side and Community Board 8, and at the Landmarks Commission, we had a public hearing. And again, it was just an advisory report that they had, because again, it was on state-owned land. And their main recommendation or concerns were just the reflectivity of the glass panels that we were proposing. So this is a photograph that we gave them to illustrate just how basically matte black the glass was going to be in relation to the cast iron and the blackened stainless steel that we were proposing. Next slide, please. So we then engaged with a structural glass engineer. We had done some other projects with structural glass at St. Francis Xavier We encased the sacristy in glass, but it was a much simpler project than was interior, so it didn't really have many complex loading at all. In this case, we hired Stutsky Engineering, which is a firm that specializes in structural glass. They actually worked on a lot of the NTA, exterior NTA stations here in the city that are all made out of structural glass. And these are some of the initial concepts that we worked with them in terms of trying to develop how this could be done with the minimal form and the minimal amount of attachments to keep it as simple as possible. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the diagrams of the analysis going through, seeing how the loading, because again, the location of where this is at the northern tip of the island, it's quite exposed to all sorts of weather. So they put it through some pretty severe testing just to see how the glass would perform as well as the structural frame. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the details further developed, where basically we're making it into 3 sections that would be bolted together. And these could be shop fabricated for the most part and then delivered to the site and made somewhat simplistic in terms of the erection. Next slide, please. And this is further developing it with, in conjunction, we had 2 structural engineers. We had Stutsky Engineering for the structural glass, and then we had Michelle Norris of Norfast Engineering, and she did the structural engineering for the stainless steel platform as well as the concrete ring that was placed at the top of the masonry to anchor the new glass lantern. So we have the opaque glass, we have the clear glass, and there's a stainless steel cap at the top of the lantern. And each of these sections are bolted together. Next slide, please. We also engaged with a lighting company to see, because as we were proceeding through this, REOC was quite excited to really make this a focus point at the northern tip. So we pitched the idea of putting new LED lighting, both in the ground as well as mounted to the platform at the top. And this is some of the modeling to show the effects of that. One of the other options that we looked at early on was to see if we could actually utilize solar panels on some of the faces of the lantern itself to generate the electricity for the lighthouse, but the cost of that just got too prohibitive. Next slide, please. So here in October 2021, roughly 10 years after our first survey, we finally start the project, which is pretty standard for some of these projects in terms of timelines. But in any case, they had an extensive bidding process, and the contractor that they engaged with is ICC Commonwealth out of Buffalo, New York, and they specialize in restoration of chimneys. And I wasn't really familiar with them at all, but they at one point segued from chimneys to lighthouses, and they've done roughly, I think, 50 lighthouses throughout the country in terms of restoring them. So they became quite qualified and really hit the ground running on this project. So here they are taking the lantern apart, and as we were disassembling it, we could see that there was a fair amount of hidden conditions and really corrosion and rusted sections that were not visible that really would have made if we went the route of restoring this, really would have added to a lot of cost overruns or change orders during the process. Next slide, please. Here it is further removing the whole concrete, which was really quite embedded in there, and it was anchored into the stonework. So it was really quite extensive to remove that concrete. And a lot of the masonry adjoining that concrete at the top was loose and had to get removed and reset. All the joints on the interior shaft of the lighthouse were pretty corroded eroded, and a lot of rising damp that caused a lot of the open joints. And the stair itself that was in there, the wooden stair, had collapsed before we had even gotten there, at least the bottom 10 feet or so. So we removed the entire sections at that point because it was really unsafe. Next slide, please. So here we are starting to get into the actual reconstruction portions. The entire interior was cut and repointed as well as the exterior. We found some good matches for the brick itself. Here's some of the mock-ups that we had to do, illustrating the landmarks, as well as SHPO, the quality and the match that we had for both the mortar as well as the brick. The top slide shows how we had to reconstruct a lot of the masonry at the top. Probably the top 8 or so courses of brickwork had to be completely rebuilt. Next slide, please. And here we are starting to rebuild the spiral stair. It would have been too cost prohibitive to do it in wood, and the maintenance would have been off the charts. So we went with a galvanized metal steel stair that goes up through, and it was quite complicated to try and figure out the actual landing spots and how they would fit in relation to the existing window openings that were there, as well as to get to the top platform at the right number of steps, because there was very little space in terms. It's only 6 feet in diameter, the whole interior shaft there. Next slide, please. And this is the top guys working on the formwork and pouring the concrete. It was an interesting rigging that they had set up for how to access the lighthouse. It's really how what they used for working on chimneys were basically working on this compression platform with little struts coming out around the perimeter rather than doing pipe scaffolding. The traditional way would have been to pipe scaffold the entire structure. And in this case, they really just worked with a little platform right at the top, and they worked with a bucket lift. And those were the 2 main access points for the whole project. And everything had to, again, being on an island, they had to be mindful of the bridge loads and things coming across the road. They are actually working on the small bridge that gets you onto the location where the lighthouse is itself. So there was a lot of limitations as to the type of equipment they could actually bring to this point in order to do this project. And also, I should say, it was also done during COVID, which added a whole nother level of complexity and kind of protection level that had to happen during the project. Next slide, please. And so ICC, being the general contractor, they reached out to a couple of other subcontractors that they'd worked with in the past that made the various components. Time Metal, which is located in upstate New York, did all the structural steel for the platform. And this is all stainless steel that was shop fabricated, and then it has it was then blackened through a chemical process that basically makes it so that, and again, essentially maintenance free, that they don't need to necessarily paint it in the future, that it'll give that black effect without paint. And you see in the bottom center section, we kind of, again, pay a little respect to the original form by putting it on the corner of each of the corner posts of the railing as the shape of the lantern itself. Next slide, please. And then for the structural glass and the frame for the structural glass itself was another contractor, and they're based out of Iowa, Sadev USA, and they work with Stutzke Engineering quite a bit, and they specialize in specifically structural glass structures. So they were really a good fit for this project, and everybody was very excited to work on the lighthouse. I mean, everyone who got a chance to either bid or be a part of it really jumped on it and put their all into making it happen. So really grateful that some of these quality contractors really stepped up and did a fantastic job. So these are pictures from their shop, some of the progress photos. Again, kind of all the sections bolted together to dry fit them before being sent to the shop. All the blackened hardware and the fittings for the glass. And then they were all shipped to a marina in New Jersey. Next slide, please. And at the marina, it's right opposite Staten Island. They assembled all of the glass components onto the structural steel frames. And we utilized these blackened stainless steel fittings, the black sealant, and everything kind of came together there and loaded onto pallets onto this one large barge with a crane. Next slide, please. And they shipped it up the East River, and they actually had to raise the bridge that leads over from Long Island City or from Queens into Roosevelt Island to get this crane. It was a massive crane. They anchored it next to the lighthouse and lifted the different sections up and brought them over by crane and landed them on top of the lantern. Again, this is not necessarily what I thought would happen. I thought that they would bring this more in smaller pieces and actually bring the glass up and set the glass up at the top. So this was really an interesting idea for them, and it seemed to work. It was the complexity was something that I would not have thought of, but it was really quite unique and interesting to watch them as they were setting this. Next slide, please. So here we have the different sections all bolted together at the top. We've salvaged that lantern or the light stanchion, and that's mounted at the top of the spiral stair. And now we're getting ready for to actually construct the platform around the perimeter. Next slide. So here they're utilizing both platforms, the one kind of ring around the skirt, so to speak, and then they've got the aerial platform, bringing up the smaller components and bolting them onto the stainless or the concrete ring at the perimeter. And all that was waterproofed and tied into that concrete ring, each section going up. Also, I should add that the masonry shaft was not necessarily a true octagon, being that it was fabricated, on site by inmates and, with not the best tools necessarily. There was a lot of rough edges, and it was not a true octagon. That the angles had to be each one of those outriggers was basically a different cut that had to be made templated and cut in the shop prior to fitting on site. Next slide, please. And then there was a fair amount of site work involved in utilizing both salvaged and new bluestone paving around the perimeter, as well as setting in the new LED lights. And this was kind of done in conjunction with kind of the bigger landscape project that was happening at the whole northern tip, and as well as the whole art installation that was being done adjacent to the lighthouse. But we tried to keep as much of the original bluestone that we could utilize. A lot of it was quite damaged and in rough shape and too small to even work in a meaningful way. But I think it was about 50% of it is the original that we found on site. Next slide, please. And this is the completed structure. Again, it only took roughly 6 months from start to finish, which I thought was remarkable for a project done, again, during COVID and kind of somewhat restricted times. Some of these, we have a drone picture looking at it from the air with the city in the background. And again, the kind of the silhouette of the lighthouse at the railing posts. Next slide, please. And then with the LED lights, I think it's quite effective. We did a lot of testing with this one night, and it's all computerized where they can set it up. It's RGB, so they can have it any color of the rainbow. They can be multicolored. Each band of lights could be a different color. My ambition is that they would be green for the Jets winning the Super Bowl at some point, but that's a long shot, I know. but it's nice to see, and they have it pre-programmed for a lot of the holiday schemes throughout the year. Next slide. And these are just some of the resources. Again, I mean, all these resources are invaluable to do our research for projects. Everything from Avery Library to the Library of Congress to postcards on eBay that you can find. I find these incredibly useful for doing historic projects where you're trying to do research on something that may or may not have been and trying to investigate. Next slide, please. And this is the whole renovation team. It was quite a few people on this small project, but they all kind of came together and did fantastic work. Next slide. And I'll open it up for questions.
Anyone has any questions? You can put them in the chat. Someone has asked, the lighthouse bears a passing resemblance to High Bridge Water Tower, a completely different structure built around the same time. Was it just a coincidence?
Yeah, I'm not sure who designed the High Bridge Tower. I don't think it was Renwick. But I mean, it was somewhat of a stylish form at the time, and that Gothic kind of steep pitched roof. So I think it was kind of more of a sign of the times in fashion.
Someone else asked, what happened to the original Fresnel light or lens? Sorry.
We don't know. That was gone long before we showed up.
That is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. We looked at I priced out, there's a person that still makes them, or at least replicas. And we did price that out, and it was an option that it was not in the budget.
What was the budget for do you have like a number for the entire thing?
It included a lot of site work. I mean, it was roughly 2 million, but that included, I think almost half of that was for site work that was outside of even the lighthouse.
Is it currently open to the public? Can people take tours?
It is not, the top is not open to go inside. I mean, there was a thought that, during that like open house New York, that they would like one day a year. I mean, because it is safe now. We have a railing that meets code. So they could potentially bring people up there, but that's really up to RIAC at this point.
And I assume since being it is fully functional now, correct?
Well, it's not a functioning. It was decommissioned in the 40s, so it's not a functioning lighthouse at all at this point. That it was deemed not needed, I guess, either because of better navigation, better lighting. I mean, just overall lighting around the city. So it's not a certified lighthouse at this point. So it does not meet any of the criteria for that.
And why was the decision made to restore it instead of just getting rid of it?
Oh, well, it's a landmark building, so I mean, Roosevelt Island Corporation would not have been able to take it down, I don't think.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I guess because it's state owned, maybe they could have, I mean, technically, but that would have been a fight. Yeah.
Sure. That's why we have landmarking. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions.
Okay.
So with that, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Tom. This is fantastic. Once again, this has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel along with a lot of other content. So if you've not been over there, please do check it out. We have a lot. And like I said, we have a lot of events coming up. So check out our website, hdc.org, and feel free to reach out with any questions.
Great.
Thank you very much and good night,
All right.
everyone.
Good night.